I'm recording my homily for the second Sunday in Ordinary Time in 2020, which is interesting because something happens that doesn't happen very often, and that's where we have a really, really smooth transition between readings from the Christmas season into Ordinary Time, or from any season into Ordinary Time. The reason I say that is because we ended the Christmas season with the baptism of Jesus, right? And so you have the story of Jesus and John the Baptist down at the Jordan River. Well, the second Sunday of Ordinary Time, we pick up with that story. So I think the church wants us to meditate on it a little bit deeper. It's kind of interesting, some of the things that John the Baptist says in the gospel this last Sunday. So as he's pointing out Jesus, and as he's saying the Lamb of God, and as he's saying he's the Son of God, and as he's saying all these things, twice he says, I did not know him. I did not know him? Really? I mean, they're like cousins, right? They're related to each other. So that doesn't seem to make sense. But I think if we go deeper spiritually with this, it makes perfect sense. Because John didn't really know him. Nobody knew him in that moment for who he really completely, truly is, right? John the Baptist would have had some sense of who he is and of his mission, but not completely. It's kind of like Mary when she pondered these things in her heart, right? It's not to say that she was ignorant or anything like that, but she didn't completely understand everything that was going to transpire. John the Baptist, in some ways, I think, is saying the same thing. And there's a really important message for us in this. I did not know him, but he was coming to know him. In our RCA class, we went through the Creed the other day, and in talking about the Creed, there's some parts in the Creed where, for us as Catholics, we just accept because we've learned about it and we've grown with it. But for people who are new, it's very difficult. For example, that Jesus is God. He's God, and he's man, right? He's God and man. To one who's never really come to understand that, it kind of blows the mind. And then to say that he's a part of this Trinity, or he is fully part, how do you explain, right, that God is three and God is one? And so yes, we have ways to explain that, but for someone who's new, it's really hard to grasp these things. And so I think for us to be able to go deeper, so that, as John the Baptist says, if we're really honest, I don't know him, but we come to the place where we do know him. And John the Baptist doesn't want us to know about him, but to know him, to really know him. So that when you wake up in the morning, when you wake up every morning, you know him. And you also know where your life is in the context of that relationship with him. You know your purpose. You know what you're supposed to do that day. And so the purpose of my homily today is to talk about what it means to know Jesus in a deeper sense. You see, I think more superficially, many of us oftentimes will pray, and we'll learn about Jesus, but it's a very superficial level. And what we do is we turn Jesus into is this person, if you will, that we use. Okay, Jesus, here's my plan, right? Here's how I'm going to spend my day today, right? I just woke up in the morning. Jesus, this is what I'm going to do. Now, help me with it, right? Jesus, can you help me with my day? Does that prayer sound familiar? Right, but we're using Jesus in that prayer. It's like, Jesus, can you help me? This is my plan. That's very different than one who really knows Jesus and realizes that, no, he's not our servant boy. He's not the one who just goes and does what we want him to do. But we wake up in the morning and we say, Jesus, what's your plan? Because I want to help. I want to be part of it. I don't have to master it. I don't have to be in control of it. I just want to be part of it. Help me, Jesus, to be part of your plan today. You notice these prayers are very different. They're very different, right? Okay, I want to put a little bit of context on this, and I'm going to use a political example. Now, I'm not commenting on politics here. I'm taking an example that I heard that I want to use in order to bring some of this to light, okay? So before I do that, shed a little light, a little background here. So in the Old Testament, you have Samuel. Now, Samuel is chosen to be this prophet for the people. But he lives in a time when the people want a king. Now, the problem is they already have a king. God. God's their king. And they've always had God as their king. But they want a real king, to use their words. They want a human king. They want a king who's going to lead them into battle. Now, why would they want this? Why are they not happy with God as king? Because they can't control God, and in this moment, there's something they really want. They want to be able to defend themselves against all these nations around them that are growing in power. And they all have kings. But the Israelites don't have this king, right? So they feel very vulnerable. And so what they want is a king who can lead them into battle. So they go to Samuel, and they're telling Samuel this. Samuel goes to God, who has this very personal relationship with God, right? And God is, you know what they're asking, right? They're not rejecting you, they're rejecting me. He says, I want you to make sure they know that they're rejecting me as their king. So Samuel goes back to the people and says, are you really sure you want this? Because you're rejecting God then as your king. He said, give us a king. Now, if you were a God in that moment, what would you do? Say, go off. Go off, get your king, right? He didn't do that. You know what he does? He says, all right, Samuel, let's help him find a king. Now, this is not God just rolling over and playing dead. This is God saying there is only one way they're going to learn that really what they want is for God to be their king. So he helps them find a king. Now, he doesn't help them find a really bad king or even a really great king, but he helps them find a king. And through the midst of that, he tells them what's going to happen. They're going to be enslaved. They're going to be servants of the king. They're going to be taxed. They're going to have drafts to join the military, right? But it's all going to be human. It's all going to be non-divine. So they begin down that path. And they have Saul then as a king. They have David as a king and Solomon as a king. And every king they have after that subsequently becomes someone more and more corrupt. And God warned them. But there's this movement, if you will, in the soul of the people where they're always going to be desiring a new king, a Messiah king. On Saturday, we celebrated a feast day. There's not really a feast day per se, so there's a tradition in the Philippines to celebrate it on the third Saturday of January, the feast day of Santo Niño, of the Christ child, right? So you know those statues of the Christ child where he's dressed in this royal garment and he has a crown on his head, but he's like 3 years old. And it looks like he has a ball in his hand, but that's the earth, right? And then he's doing a sign with his fingers right here, right? Very symbolic of God and man, the two natures, right? God and man. And then the three, the Trinity. But it's a 3-year-old. How many people follow a 3-year-old king? So there's something very different about the kingship of Jesus Christ. But what Jesus represents is a return to the divine king, to the God king. The God king comes back to us, right? Or we come back to the God king, if you will. A little while back, there's someone in the political scene who's very famous who came out and said that he believes that President Trump is a chosen one. Now, some people may not take that serious, but he was serious. And he said what he meant by that was just like Samuel, working on behalf of God, went out and chose Saul to be this king, that President Trump is chosen by God in the same way. Now, the problem with that is that the context of the entire story of going out and choosing the king was a rejecting of God as the king. I wonder if there's some analogies to that today. Now, I suppose the people who would say that Donald Trump is chosen would disagree with that. But I think we have to be very careful and remember the context of this. The people wanted a human king because that's what they wanted. They wanted control. They didn't want to have to trust God, whom they can't control. And so I say this for us to be very, very careful, and I'm not even really talking about us as a nation, but each of us as individuals. When we wake up in the morning, do we see God as one we want to control? Or do we see him as one whom we want to serve? Because if he's one whom we want to serve, then we must allow him to be king. Jesus, the child king, holds the earth in his hand. Right? And so the question is, do we use God for our own gain, for our own desires, or do we serve God and love him and desire to serve him in that? Right? I also bring this up to bring up two issues in our country that we celebrate this week. The first is Martin Luther King Day. Now, I bring that up because it's a holiday that's meant to remember something that's far greater than any one person. And that is that in our country, in its very foundation, we have the tradition of enslaving an entire race. And there were people who even used the Bible and used our Christian teachings to defend that slavery, to rob an entire race of its dignity, of its humanity, of its beauty. And there was a bloody war that had to happen in order to root out that evil. In other words, if you will, in order to go back to a clear understanding of what it means to follow the divine King, who would never want us to enslave our brothers and sisters. We had to root out that cancer, and I would dare say we are still doing that. Racism and prejudices and the desire to rob humanity of its dignity are still here in our country. We are not free of this. As individuals, we may say, well, I'm not racist. But we live in a world that still has it, which means we still have a mission to root out this cancer. Anything that robs a person of their intrinsic beauty and dignity must be rooted out. Because what it means is we have a false king. We've turned to a human king, or idol, if you will. Now, the other issue, which I don't think is a coincidence, that we celebrate them both back-to-back, celebrate's the wrong word, remember them back-to-back, is the anniversary of Roe versus Wade, in which abortion was legalized in the United States. And since it was legalized, over 60 million children have been slaughtered in the name of convenience, or in the name of desperation, in the name of fear. And the reason that Catholics or Christians or other people can say that that is acceptable is because they embraced a false king. Otherwise, there's no way they could look at God face to face with blood on our hands and say that there's nothing wrong. A couple bishops went to visit the Pope this last week for their ad limina visit. So every 5 years, the bishops have to go back to visit the Pope to kind of like check in, right? And some of the bishops were just commenting on how this is something that we're remembering this week in the United States. And they mentioned to him about the 60 million children who've been killed in abortion. And they said that the Pope was legitimately shocked by that. It is shocking, right? And I think really the only path, the only true path through all of this is when we finally return to our divine King, where he rules our day and we allow him to rule our day, our minds and our hearts, and how we live our life each day, and what we believe and whom we follow and choose to follow. Now, what I'm not saying in this is that God wants to be our president of the United States. I'm not saying that. We have layers of leadership that we'll always need. But in the morning, when we wake up, we ask ourselves, who do I serve, right? Now, this ties back to Samuel, when he was a young boy learning to become this prophet. And God began speaking to him, but he didn't know it was God, right? So you think of John the Baptist, I didn't know him. And so Samuel goes to Eli, his mentor, and says, are you calling me? Because he doesn't know who's calling him. And Eli says, no. Well, he comes back later because he hears the voice again, but he doesn't know who it is. And Eli says, no, I'm not calling you. Finally, Eli, who's mature and who has a closer relationship, says, I know what's going on. God is calling you. So the next time you hear the voice, this is how you are to respond. Now, this was our responsorial psalm from the Psalms this last week. Here I am, Lord. I come to do your will. What a beautiful way to wake up in the morning. To be able to say that, the first words out of your mouth. I almost wonder if I should put that up on my wall in my bedroom, right? Because those usually aren't my thoughts when I wake up in the morning. Say, here I am, Lord. I come to do your will. Here I am, Lord. I come to do your will. All right. God bless you. I'll see you next week.